Do you want to know what I need? I'm going to need a doctor very soon because I'm going to have a heart attack and it's going to be on you because I keep finding these articles online. Then you like these videos that I make and I'm going to have to keep making these videos. So please stop liking. Do not leave a like. Do not leave a comment, no engagement whatsoever, do not subscribe, don't share it, and absolutely do not watch until the end. I can already feel the pressure on my diluted pizza blood. You know what, since you're gonna call a doctor, make it medieval, will ya? Hello noble ones, welcome back to my channel. This is the Metatron speaking and this is a historically accurate katana. So why am I showing you this absolute piece of beauty? Because it's the last historically accurate thing you're gonna see on this video, and once again, this is your fault. So, I want to start with something really powerful, because that's what you deserve. And do you know the channel called Zach Evans? If you don't, please click in the link in the description and subscribe. He's got a lot of good videos, but what he doesn't have is decency. Because this guy sent me a message. We are friends. He sent me a message with, and then he wanted to show me this book that he's been reading called Knights. And you'd be like, okay, it has a pretty art cover. So this is going to be great, isn't it? Right? Now, call me crazy, but if I were to write a book about the medieval period, I wouldn't like double check it, I would pentakill check it. Because, I mean, it's something that is going to stay there physically. It's not like a video that you can enlist, but you know, who am I to say? Given, Zach being a much more knowledgeable individual than I am when it comes to the medieval period, knows exactly that this book is complete nonsense, and he sent it to me for the mere pleasure of seeing me suffer, just like you. Here's what the book says. The destrier was specially bred to withstand the clash of battle and to bear the weight of a fully armoured knight. The massively proportioned destrier was also armoured, sometimes so heavily that they were unable to move. I'm out of here. I belong with the misfits. This isn't even a matter of like the guy who wrote it is a complete ignorant. It's the lack of logic. How can a unit designed for charging be unable to move? This is just the beginning. That's what you clicked, that's what you get. Also, in case you were wondering, however, despite its great strength and useful ability to trample on the enemy, I wonder how considering it is unable to move, the destrier lacked stamina. It could not sustain a gallop, but could, at best, trot. The typical trotting charge. This was apparently most uncomfortable for the rider, indeed. How can you... Okay. Thank you for that, Zach. Very appreciated. No, really. I mean it. I'm gonna block you. Oh, you thought that was bad? Well, get ready for the article on Ranker.com called 13 Lies About the Medieval Era Even History Buffs Are Guilty of Believing. Are you a history buff? Do you believe this? Let's check it, because I'm a history buff, so I suppose yeah. Now, reading all of these articles might feel like a complete waste of your time. On the other hand, a great way to spend your time is to invest it into learning skills that can be very useful for your future. And that's why this connects perfectly to the sponsor that made this video possible, boot.dev. Boot.dev is a platform that uses tactics learned from modern gaming design to push students towards the goal of becoming a programmer. In our day and age, as our society becomes more and more competitive, spending time to learn a skill that is actually applicable and can lead you to a full-on career is in fact paramount. And a career choice that you should absolutely start considering is programming and back-end development. And their mission is not only to teach you in the most thorough way possible, but also to do it while having fun, introducing you to programming languages such as Go and Python. And the way they're gonna forge your programming career is to teach you how to code. I've been checking their Python course, and to be honest, as a former teacher and someone who was used to professionally teach at school, what I really like about their system is that they make it look like a game. It's fun, it's entertaining, it almost looks like an RPG with experience level and even a certain level of competitiveness if that's what you're into. Now, the reason why becoming a programmer can be a very smart career choice is because programmers have a very high earning potential. According to Stack Overflow, the median salary for programmers in the US in 2023 was $100,000. That's a lot of money if you ask me. Not to mention the programmers often have the choice or the option to work from home, and as someone who's been working from home for many years now, it's something I wouldn't trade with anything. So check the link in the description box and use my code Metatron to get a 25% off your first payment at boot.dev. That's 25% off your first month or your first year, depending on the subscription. You choose. And massive thanks to Boot for sponsoring my video. Myth number 1. Women didn't work trade jobs. The lie. Women were extremely mistreated and underprivileged during the Dark Ages. Forbidden from work. Okay, so first of all, of course, the usage of the term Dark Ages is kind of outdated by now, but perhaps they're doing it on purpose. The thing is, though, that you're saying that it is a lie that women were extremely mistreated and underprivileged in the Middle Ages, which, I mean, women were mistreated, I want to say, throughout the entirety of human history. And when it comes to underprivileged, considering the fact that women got the right to vote very recently, historically, and there were absolutely several jobs that women couldn't. I mean, this is the lie? Well, maybe I do believe the lie then. Its origin, it is a widely believed notion that women were slaves to their husbands, unable to work or do anything independently. Well, yeah, that is a very broad expression, and you're using a term that is very... Why it's wrong. Women in medieval times worked many trades. Some of these trades were considered women's work, like weaving and jewelry making. Well, yeah, it's like... weaving. I think we need to move to the next one because this is already... No one believes that women were allowed to weave. Myth, everyone was filthy and thought bathing was weird. The lie, bathing did not exist in medieval times and everyone smelled really, really bad. Okay, so that's the second one. I'm starting to have a little hope here. Maybe it's not as bad. I mean, the first few points were very weird, but these are, at least they're correct in myths. So a few things are correct, meaning that medieval people did bathe. Myth, all Europeans were Caucasian. Okay, never mind. Here we are, back with politics. Yeah, let's check it out, shall we? Myth, all Europeans were Caucasian. The lie, everyone in Europe was white. Its origins. Many TV shows and movies depict the Middle Ages with absolutely no people of color. White wrong. This is wrapped up in another misconception about this period, that few people travel beyond their own town. In fact, even peasants would travel overseas for pilgrimages. Yeah. There is overwhelming evidence that people from North Africa and the Middle East lived in Europe starting in the 8th century and possibly even earlier. Medieval people were aware of varying races, religions and skin tones. Okay, so here is why this is complete political nonsense. First of all, I don't think anyone believes that 100% of the population in medieval Europe was in fact white. Also, there were merchants. Merchants were absolutely allowed. There were mercenaries, and mercenaries would have belonged to different ethnicities. But most importantly, the problem that I have with this is not that I don't agree that absolutely, if you were to travel, particularly not really in rural areas, but mostly in like very famous, very big cities, you would have encountered people of different ethnicities. So you would have encountered, as they say, people of color. And of course, they weren't only slaves. You would have had, as I say, merchants. You would have had mercenaries. So is it true that there were people who weren't white Europeans, or should I say white-skinned, so we don't actually connect to the politically charged definition of white made by Benjamin Franklin, but white in the sense of non-black, so someone who has light skin? Is it true that there were also non-whites? And the answer is yes, of course there were, and they would be living among the original European inhabitants in Europe. But it is also important to underline the fact that still the majority of Europeans would have been white or light-skinned, so we disconnect from Benjamin Franklin for a moment. So it's fine if a medieval game or a medieval movie mostly shows white people, and if you do want to set a movie in a very cosmopolitan city, and then you want to show some, the occasional African guy or the occasional Middle Easterner, that's absolutely fine. But the majority should look like white Europeans, because that's what Europe looked like. But the simple historical fact that there were non-Europeans who were living among the Europeans in Europe does not make it a myth to say that Europeans were Caucasians, because otherwise, by the very same logic, just the simple fact that you had Portuguese, Dutch and English living in Japan would allow me to say, myth, all Japanese are Asian. Or Marco Polo and a few Jesuits moved to China, myth, all Chinese are Asian. Oh wait, there were traders and settlers in Africa coming from Europe, myth, all Africans are from Africa. But of course they're not gonna say that, because this shows exactly the kind of politics that they're trying to push. It works when you're trying to say that Europeans were not predominantly Caucasians, which they were, and to be honest still are, even though now of course our cities are a lot more cosmopolitan and there is a much higher level of immigration. But then of course they're not going to use the same standards for all other ethnicities, because for these people the law is not equally applied to all, which is the very basis of justice and, to be honest, professional academia when talking about historical aspects. Okay, in order to improve my mental sanity and avoid a complete nervous breakdown, I decided to review now an article from a website that's usually giving out very good information. But what I noticed, and it's called ImperiumRomanum by the way, of course links in the description, but what I noticed is that they have a article called 10 Myths and Lies, again with the freaking lies, about ancient Romans. Here's the thing. Once again, this is not an attack on the website, they do share a lot of fantastic information, but even with me, I've got almost 1,000 videos and occasionally I've made mistakes and I've said things that were not correct and I removed those videos, as you can see on this dedicated video where I discussed that. And that's the same thing here. It is a very good website usually, but on this one, I think they missed the mark on a thing or two, so let's review it. The first myth that they are discussing is called, did gladiator fights always end in slaughter? And this is actually a pretty good point, I've just read it, and it's basically saying that yes, they were expensive, so they didn't just want, like in the movies often we see that gladiators die. Of course some gladiators did die, but not in the numbers that you would imagine if you were to like follow what movies usually give you the sort of impression, and this is all correct. But the second one is where I'm starting to have some problems, because they ask, were gladiators perfectly muscular men? Let's read it. In 1993, in Ephesus, the western part of Turkey, the former capital of the Roman province of Asia, an ancient burial ground was found where, according to researchers, gladiators were buried. A total of over 60 people were buried in the cemetery, of which 22 gladiators and 31 other people buried on the spot, not fighting in the arena. So 22. Were examined. Researchers conducted detailed studies of the bones and skulls of the buried bodies for comparison purposes. The conclusions were surprising. The gladiatorial diet was, in today's view, very vegetarian and high in carbohydrates or rather low in protein. After the isotope analysis was performed, it turned out that the gladiators, compared to the rest of the city's inhabitants, ate much more vegetables and less meat. Hence the colloquial term for gladiators, ordeari, used by Pliny the Elder, meaning barley eaters. What I want to say before we continue reading is that I have of course reviewed this study. It's interesting, it does bring in some information that could be used, but it's only 22 samples. And this is one of the main problems that we often have when we look at DNA analysis, this, and skeletal remains analysis, that, is that of course they do not represent the entirety of the population, and in this case the entirety of the fighting class. And mind you, the fact that the diet is mostly barley eaten, that's a little more solid because of course it's backed up by literary evidence, as they said. So already the fact that they probably ate a lot of barley, yeah, it's a little stronger as a statement, but 22 bodies of gladiators do not represent the entirety. It just represents perhaps one school and their habits. It does not represent the entirety of the Republic, the entirety of the Roman Empire, and doesn't necessarily set an example for how all gladiators should be imagined. It's a very small sample pool. Let's continue. Moreover, gladiators were not perfectly muscled men with impeccable figures in our opinion, but rather had significant amounts of fat. So this is connected. I think this is a myth. I do not believe this idea of gladiators were just fat. And what they're going to keep doing now is that after this statement, which to me is quite silly, they're going to try and prove it by saying the advantages of having a fat body for a gladiator when facing enemies using sharp swords. And this is when they lost me. Scientists believe that such a diet was aimed at acquiring significant amounts of subcutaneous fat. It was extremely helpful in the arena because it protected the most important parts of the body, such as ligaments, nerves, and blood vessels from cutting. It guaranteed a better spectacle for the masses. As the gladiators were injured, you could see cut and bloody bodies, and yet they were still fighting in the arena. I think this is absolutely ridiculous. So you want the gladiators to be fat so that when they get cut by a sharp blade, the ligaments are still protected? Have you ever seen how deeply a blade can cut? I'm just saying. And that's usually against a little pig carcass that is not even moving. Imagine in the heat of combat, if they're using sharp blades, fat is not gonna prevent ligaments from being cut. Not to mention, there is something problematic with what they say as they describe this, remember, protein-free and high in carbohydrates diet. Let's read. Galen mentioned that gladiators ate mainly barley, either in a form of pudding or with water as a drink, and legumes, such as broad bean soup. Another type of meal was broad beans, mash mixed with peeled barley. Dried fruit was also eaten. So they did eat protein, because I mean, dried food, it's got protein, legumes have protein. It just seems that in this specific school, perhaps they didn't eat much meat protein. Not to mention, another thing that doesn't seem to support this idea of, oh well, all gladiators must have been fat, it's the freaking artwork. Let's see how the ancient Romans, who were absolutely familiar with what gladiators look like, represent them in the artwork. Yeah, so I'm not saying the gladiators looked like modern day bodybuilders, but I do think that they had the body of a fighter. Because guess what? That's what they did. They fought, trained in combat, and they must have had an incredible stamina. Anyways, I think this satisfies our daily dose of complete horseshit for the day. And if you enjoyed it, I'm sure you did. I certainly didn't, but you did. So if you did enjoy it, I'm glad I made your day. Thank you very much. And as always, don't forget to take advantage of the amazing offer from boot.dev by clicking the link in the description. And if this video does continue to get views, I'm just gonna have to continue the series, won't I? You muppet.